Here we are today in the Royal Kilmainham Hospital in Dublin, and it's the celebration of a year that travellers have got an ethnic recognition as an ethnic group in Ireland, and this is quite an impressive exhibition, and there are a number of events going on to celebrate this occasion. Thank you.
This story here is actually before Laborie Park was opened in 1967, and this is the story when many of the families who live in Laborie Park today lived in the fields in Cherry Orchard in 1963. And they built their own school, which was a 10-foot by 15-foot wooden shack with the support of volunteers from UCD and the Quaker community. And on a weekly basis there was 50 traveller children who were educated here. And in 1964, Dublin Corporation, as it was known as at the time, came with the guards and tore down Scull Nave Christor. And families moved further up the field in the Ring Road in Ballyfermot. But the families' resilience to their right to education led them to build St. Christopher's School 2 in January 1965 that was opened. So what this story does is tell you two things. One, it shows the absolute resilience of the traveller community against state oppression. But two, it shows you and it dispels that whole myth about travellers are not interested in education. Well, back in 1963, travellers were building their own school. The issue with travellers and education is that traveller ethnicity and culture is not recognised anywhere in the curriculum, and travellers have been failed by the education system of the state. They're the problems with education in Ireland, not that travellers don't want education. So that's our story of the school. And then we're on to Laborie Park, opened in 1967. It was the first traveller accommodation built in the country. And some of the families who lived in there and moved in 67 still live in Laborie Park today. So the photos that we have charting down the walls here are some of the life of the families that lived in Cherry Orchard Fields and in Laborie Park over the last 50 years. So the story goes from when the families were living in the fields with absolutely nothing, the barrel top wagons, but no such thing as running water or sanitation. And this is meal time for a family having cooked their food on the homemade fire, to when they actually moved into Laborie Park and the first tagines were built. But as you will see by some of the photographs, even in 1963 there was a lot of political activism going on with the traveller community in Laborie Park. And here you have some of the signs that would have been around the site at the time in relation to travellers calling for a right to culturally appropriate accommodation and different services. So these are some of the what was called tagines that were built in Laborie for 1967. What's horrendous about these is the fact that they're built from slabs of asbestos. So the outside slab and the inside slab are both sheets of asbestos that was filled with foam. So people were living basically in a death trap and inhaling them. So we're seeing the consequences of that now and over the last decade or so, when so many families have, most members of their family, some form of cancer. And when these were eventually knocked down in Laborie Park 20 years ago, there was no protection of people. The bulldozers came in and knocked them down. So the families inhaled all of those fumes. And this is inside a tagine. So these are Jerry and Mary Berry, who are the grandparents of Margaret Wall, who's on the board of management of Ballyfermot Travellers Action Project. And the next boards show the comparison from Laborie Park 50 years ago to Laborie Park today. So here we have Laborie in 1969, and then here we have Laborie Park last year. So 50 years later, this is what it looks like. Here we have young people in Laborie Park 50 years ago and young people in Laborie Park at our Traveller Pride event in 2016. We've tin smitten in Laborie 50 years ago and tin smitten in Laborie in 2016 at our Traveller Pride event. And then here's the Keenan family, the famous musicians, the most famous uilleann pipers from the country. And this is Paddy Keenan, who's going to play in the concert this afternoon, and his father Johnny Keenan. But their brother Thomas Keenan still lives in Laborie Park, and he lives in here in number 3 Laborie Park. And he plays the uilleann pipes, the accordion and the tin whistle. The next storyboard is about traveller culture and really highlighting the 2 core elements of traveller culture in relation to nomadism and horses being central to traveller life. And that's really depicted in this picture here when you look at the work that the families have even gone to keep the straw dry for the horses. You know, we don't know who this individual is, but you can see the pride in her face with her horse. And 50 years later, here's a woman in Laborie Park who's the biggest horse owner in Laborie Park, and you can see that sense of pride is still there with the horse ownership, a critical part of the traveller community. This is some of the Wall family who moved into Laborie in '67. That was the family that we seen cooking their dinner on the fire up in the fields in '63, and some of those family members still live in Laborie Park today. Mary Wall, now Mary Devine, is 22 years waiting on permanent accommodation in Laborie Park. Again, just some general family pictures, and that brings us up to our most recent campaigns. And in 2016, the National Traveller Accommodation Consultative Committee officials would have visited Laborie Park, and this was some of the messages that the families wanted to give them. Families are living in a death trap, and they want traveller accommodation, not forced assimilation into standard housing. And last year, for the recognition of traveller ethnicity, this is some of the young people from Laborie Park who didn't get into the Dáil, and this was us chanting at the Buswells Hotel before the announcement, and this was our celebration outside the Dáil after the announcement. Dan Flynn is one of the older traveller men in the country. He lived in Laborie Park until 2 years ago, and this was his 90th birthday 2 years ago. So we're celebrating 50 odd years at Laborie Park.
My name is Michael Power. I'm here from Traveller's Voice magazine. Traveller's Voice magazine is a publication that comes out every 2 months. It profiles the positive contributions that travellers make to society. We've got stories from around the country from travellers who continue on in education. We've got a lot of health-related articles and promotion of positive health and eating. And
we try and represent all aspects of travel culture. So as well, we cover a lot of music and literature. And today is very important, obviously, because we have ethnic recognition. We're celebrating a year. So that's really a positive aspect. One of the most positive we've been able to cover recently.
Yeah, I suppose as well as that, I mean, I think the magazine, it's a fantastic medium to get, as Michael said, some of the great news stories that, that happen around the country out there, because I suppose all too often we hear about the negative stuff, and, that's what fills up our news feeds and our newspapers. Whereas for ourselves, we look at the positives, and there are so many out there. A lot of stuff that just people don't necessarily hear about on a day-to-day basis, but I suppose it's our job to get that word out there and maybe try and change a few attitudes along the way.
The National Museum of Ireland Country Life, which has a branch based at Turlough Park, County Mayo, is hosting an exhibition, Traveller's Journey, and the exhibition is going to run from July 2018 to May 2019, and it's going to explore traveller culture and history, mainly based in the west of Ireland. And that's opening at the museum in July 2018. It's free admission, and we'd encourage groups and individuals around the country, traveller and settled, to come and see what looks like it's going to be an absolutely fantastic exhibition for 2018 for the National Museum of Ireland.
Our project is that we have 2 social enterprises. One is the deliver and home installation, and the other one is mattress recycling, and we employ members of the traveller community.
These are blackberry stems. These can be used to make a tea. This sort of tea helps with rheumatism and stuff. What it is you usually boil it and boil it usually in a metal kettle. It'll boil fairly well. Some people break it down and grind it down as well, and it is fairly effective. There's other remedies that is used here, the likes of nettles. Nettles were used for purifying the blood. Also could be used for arthritis and pain relief if taken in large amounts. Usually it's 2 teaspoons to a small kettle, and usually they prefer a metal kettle because it seems to boil better and on a natural flame. You have the likes of the garlic here. The garlic can be used again for a sore throat, blood pressure, purifying the blood. Onions can be used into any sort of concoction. Usually people used to cut onions one time ago to take up the viruses or colds, and the old people seem to be more in touch with that years gone back. They cut an onion and put it in the sole of their foot at night time, which would give them relief. They do the same thing with the likes of potatoes, cut them with the starch, and it would help, they believed, heal them from flus and colds. The starch also could be used then for burdens. If a person got a burden, when they'd run it under cold water, they'd rub the cut potato to the burden, and the starch actually would help heal and stop a burden from festering and blistering, which was very effective. We must remember that when you go back 50, 60 years ago, we didn't have the doctors that we have today, we didn't have the medication, so people had to use what was around them, because sometimes if they're out the country, the nearest town could be 9 to 10 miles away, they wouldn't have the means to get there. And there's honey. Honey used to be mixed with treacle as a cough syrup, and it was very effective. You put 2 teaspoons of honey with a spoon of treacle, and we all know treacle is fairly thick. So you put it in boiling water, let it break it down, cool, and give it as a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons to a child or a person suffering from a cough. This was very, very effective as well. As it says, there's sage there. Sage was used to ward off bad vibes, evil. It could be burned and used around where you were staying or in any house. As well as you can see the holy water. This represents the beliefs that were had in holy places, the likes of holy wells. And you can see here the likes is left out, St. Philomena's cord, which was seen people, and especially girls, wear it for a sign of protection and virtue. It's quite common. In trees around where holy wells were, you'd always find a bit of rag or a piece of a tie, and it was people acknowledging that they had been there and they believed they were cured and left it behind them. You know, and there was a great devotion into that. I suppose times have changed so much because the belief system has changed, but a lot of people are going back to traditional cures. People are going back to herbs, and people are going back to what some of our ancestors believed, because now science find out they weren't that far off the mark, that some of the cures they believed in actually worked, you know, and there's a benefit in kind. All right, some of them were off the wall, but I'd say a majority of them weren't that far-fetched.